The history of the Patriarchate of Pec begins in the year 1220, when King Stefan I crowned bestowed upon the newly established archbishopric in Žiča a few meters in Hvosna region, including also Pec, with its villages in Ždrelo, a place on the Bistrica river. For more context, it is important to know that the Serbian Orthodox Church became autocephalous, or, in other words, independent, in the year 1219, thanks to Rastko Nemanic, who is better known under his other name, Saint Sava of Serbia. Now, Saint Sava had two older brothers, Vuka Nemanic and Stefan Nemanic, all three of them being the sons of Stefan Nemanja, the Great Župan, or Grand Prince of back then's Grand Principality of Serbia. Shortly before his death, Stefan Nemanja took his second son, Stefan Nemanic, as heir to the throne. The reasons for this decision of his are not clear, but with regard to the later development of things, it obviously was the right decision to be done, because a route towards prosperity and great artistic and cultural development was now opened. Stefan Nemanic was crowned around 1217, after transforming the Grand Principality of Serbia into the Kingdom of Serbia around the same year. Thus, Stefan Nemanic became Stefan I crowned, or, in Serbian, Stefan Prvovenčani, because he was now the first Serbian king. Alongside his brother Saint Sava, the Serbian Orthodox Church became autocephalous, or, in other words, independent, in 1219. It was also King Stefan I crowned, who wanted every other Serbian king that would come after him to be crowned in Žiča, where he himself was crowned, and what was now the Serbian Archbishopric of Žiča, of Archimandrite, Saint Sava being now the first Archbishop of the Serbian Church. Now, after the context is cleared, let's continue with the actual topic. Sava's successor, the second Serbian Archbishop Arsenije I, who bestowed that position from 1233 up until his death in 1263, and who served under the rule of two Serbian kings, Stefan Vladislav Nemanic and Stefan Uroš I Nemanic, chose to build his church dedicated to the Holy Apostles around the mid-13th century on that place near the Bistrica river that should later become the Patriarchate of Pec. It should be noted that the church was built upon the foundations and ruins of an earlier Roman basilica dating from the 11th century. In fact, everything that could be preserved of that old basilica was incorporated into the new church, mainly parts of some walls that now serve as interior walls of a central part of Arsenije's church. Inside Arsenije's Church of the Holy Apostles, his name is mentioned in the prayer form in one liturgical inscription from the time when the church was painted, around the year 1260. 3 years later, in 1263, Arsenije died and was buried inside the church. It is not certain whether or not the Church of the Holy Apostles had mainly the burial purpose for the Serbian Orthodox hierarchs, although it is highly probable, because Arsenije himself was buried inside of it according to his rights as founder, while his successor Sava II was also buried here, and same goes to many other Serbian archbishops and later patriarchs as well. Even relics from Žiča were transferred to Pec monastery, such as the relics of Archbishop Evstatij I by the end of the 13th century. Evstatij I himself served as archbishop from 1279 up until his death in 1286. Over the course of time, additional churches that were used as burial places as well were built next to the Church of the Holy Apostles by Archbishops Danilo II and Nicodim I. Danilo's church was called the Church of the Virgin Hodegitria, and it had a side chapel built right next to it, dedicated to St. Nicholas, while Nicodim's church was called the Church of St. Demetrius. All three of these churches are linked with one huge narthex, and together with a side chapel, they represent the church complex of the Patriarchate of Pec monastery that can be visited today. We will look into each of those churches with a more detailed approach towards arts and architecture in future incoming parts on this channel. But for now, let's continue with a rough history part, and then we will move on to the design of the monastery complex and later to the churches. Now, the Patriarchate of Pec was originally never intended to be the Archbishopric and later the Patriarchate of the Serbian Orthodox Church, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, it naturally took over that function from the Archbishopric of Žiča slowly and steadily during the course of the last decades of the 13th century. But neither then nor some decades later has Žiča ceased to be considered the seat of the Archbishopric. At some point in history, Žiča even retook its original position and even served as the seat of the Patriarchate itself, but officially, especially after 1346, the Patriarchate of Pec is the traditional seat of the Serbian Orthodox Church till today. Aside from the decision of the archbishops to bury themselves in Pec, the constant attacks and threats from the east, mainly the incursions of a Tatar army that went deep into the Serbian kingdom around the middle of the 13th century, as well as the attacks of the Bulgarians in 1291 or 1292, all resulted into the final decision to move the archbishopric from Žiča to Pec, especially after Žiča was devastated by the Bulgarians in 1291-1292. Even though the archbishops and kings took great effort into reconstructing the devastated Žiča monastery for the course of 3 whole decades, it became clear to them that their stay in Pec monastery would be permanent. Thus, the monastery of Pec officially became the Archbishopric of Pec and thus the seat of the Serbian Orthodox Church. As already mentioned, later archbishops of Pec would build their own churches right next to the main one of Arsenia I, which had the same burial purpose as Arsenia's Church of the Holy Apostles, next to being embellished in such a way that the whole complex fits into its role of being the Serbian Orthodox Church seat. First, Archbishop Nicodim, who fulfilled his role from 1317 to 1324, built the church dedicated to St. Demetrius next to the northern side of the Church of the Holy Apostles and had it painted with beautiful frescoes in the beginning of the reign of King Stefan of Dečani, with the latter being the founder of the highly important Visoki Dečani monastery where the king's relics remain since his death till today. Nicodim himself was buried in the prepared tomb by the northern wall in the western part of his church dedicated to St. Demetrius, which all changed not long after because of the fact that his relics began to manifest the signs of sanctity. Thus they were removed from the grave and placed in a coffin before the iconostasis of the Church of St. Demetrius. Even that wasn't permanent, because the relics of St. Nicodim I had yet again been removed and transferred to the Church of the Holy Apostles, in which they are now. The reason for that was the huge damage that the Church of St. Demetrius took around the year 1600 during the course of the Ottoman-Austrian War from 1593 to 1606. Regardless, before the end of the 14th century, Bishop Marko of Pec compiled the service to St. Nicodim, completing thus his cult, which to this day, in addition to the cult of St. Arsenia, is the brightest one emanating from the Patriarchate of Pec. Now, with regard to the other church, the Church of the Virgin Hodegitria, which was built next to the southern side of the Church of the Holy Apostles, Nicodim's successor, Archbishop Danilo II, who served on this position from 1324 to 1337 and who was the founder of a church dedicated to the Virgin Hodegitria, massively engaged in embellishing both his church and the side chapel dedicated to St. Nicholas, which was also built by Danilo II on the southern side of his church of the Virgin Hodegetria. In front of all the three churches, under the orders of Archbishop Danilo II, a capacious narthex was built, combining the churches and further developing the overall complex. A large front of it was created as well, which contained a small church dedicated to Archbishop Danilo II's namesake, Saint Daniel the Stylite. The beauty of a narthex fascinated several people who witnessed it. Archbishop Danilo II's biography writer and disciple of unknown name was amazed by the beauty of a narthex, calling it bright, big, glorious and beautiful, worthy of much talk, in his writings. Next to him, one writer from the first half of the 15th century, whose lines would rank among the oldest chronicles, was to classify the narthex of Pec among the exquisite masterpieces of Serbian art. Today, one can just assume how that structure looked like originally during those times from the outside, but given the quite good condition of it, it is not an impossible task. The insides and the outsides of a narthex were painted with frescoes, with the outside ones having sadly succumbed to the course of time. After Archbishop Danilo II's death, he was laid in the tomb under the magnificent sarcophagus in the northwestern corner of the church, and soon after that his portrait and the one of Saint Nicholas were painted above the grave. This fresco was recently removed from the original position and placed on the southwest pillar of the Church of the Virgin, where there were no preserved frescoes. Almost 10 years after Danilo's death, massive changes occurred with regard to both the Serbian state and its church. The son and successor of King Stefan of Dečani, King Stefan Dušan, declared himself an emperor in 1346, while at the same time the Serbian Orthodox Church became a patriarchate. Thus the seat of the church, the Archbishopric of Pec, ascended into the Patriarchate of Pec, with Archbishop Joannikije II now being the first patriarch of the Serbian Orthodox Church. Next to the official name, the Patriarchate of Pec, two other names were used to describe it, one being the Great Church and the other being the Saviour's Home. The latter name is a reflection of the continuity between Žiča, the former seat, and Pec, the current seat, just as the expression the throne of Saint Sava became a symbol of the beginning and continuity of the autocephalous Serbian Church. Archbishop and Patriarch Joannikije II was working hard on embellishing his cathedral church, the Patriarchate of Pec. According to his biography, he decorated the great church with several icons, silver oil lamps and vessels ornamented with pearls and precious stones. The western part of the Church of the Holy Apostles, with regard to the supporting arch, which was built at that time, was painted, and it is assumed that due to Patriarch Joannikije II, the church floor was paved anew, while a stone patriarchal throne was erected on the south side below its dome. If that is true, then it would mean that during the life of Patriarch Joannikije II, and due to his efforts, some new frescoes were painted in the choir places of the church. All of those efforts and changes, of course, did not only center around the great church. The Patriarch bestowed many villages to the monastery of the great church and built churches in all of them, but his more impressive work is obviously the fact that he built two churches in the Holy Land, the Church of Saint Elijah on Mount Carmel and the Church of Saint Nicholas on Mount Tabor, both located in modern-day Israel. That marks him as yet another Serbian hierarch that managed to build Serbian Orthodox churches and monasteries in the Holy Land, with King Milutin probably being the most prominent one out of them, as being the founder of a former Serbian Orthodox monastery of the Holy Archangels, a monastery that withstood the horrors of time and that can be visited today in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, Patriarch Joannikije II's churches do not share that favorable fate, thus both of them are in total ruins, with a church dedicated to Saint Elijah on Mount Carmel being somewhat in better condition than the other one on Mount Tabor. The Patriarch himself fell ill and died in 1354 on his way from Žiča to Pec. His body was laid in a prepared grave in the Church of the Holy Apostles, and the scene of his burial was painted over a low sarcophagus, which form was later altered. If not for his death at that time, the Church of the Holy Apostles would have been further embellished, as this was his reason for the trip from Žiča to Pec. After Patriarch Joannikije's death, the Patriarchate of Pec remained the seat of his successors, such as Patriarch Sava IV, who served on his position from 1354 to 1375. The Patriarch had a difficult task during his period because the tense relationship with the Patriarchate of Constantinople as a result of a schism needed to be solved. Having served under the rule of two Serbian emperors, Emperor Stefan Dušan and the emperor's son, Emperor Stefan Uroš V, the reconciliation with the Patriarchate of Constantinople was finally achieved in the same year after his death in 1375. After his death, Patriarch Sava IV was buried in the southwestern part of the Church of St. Demetrius under the sarcophagus which still stands at that place.